Welcome, dear listener, to Peacetime Story, where mystery meets serenity. Tonight, allow your mind to drift into the quiet world of Hercule Poirot, where moonlight hides secrets and every whisper conceals a clue. If you enjoy calm, clever mysteries told in gentle tones, do subscribe, and let's begin Murder Beneath the Moon, a softly spoken tale of death, deceit, and deduction. Chapter 1. The Moonlight Invitation. The village of Eldridge lay nestled along the gentle curve of the Thames, a place where time seemed to slow to the rhythm of the river's quiet flow. It was one of those forgotten corners of England, where ancient oaks whispered secrets to the wind, and the cobblestone lanes wound lazily between thatched cottages adorned with climbing roses. On this particular evening in late autumn, the air was crisp and laced with the faint, sweet perfume of fading blooms, mingling with the earthy mist rising from the water's edge. The moon hung low in the sky, a luminous pearl casting its silvery glow over the landscape, turning the world into a dreamlike tapestry of shadows and light. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, had taken up temporary residence in a modest inn on the village outskirts. He had come seeking respite from the clamor of London, drawn by the promise of tranquility and perhaps a touch of nostalgia for the serene countrysides of his youth. Poirot was a man of meticulous habits, his small, egg-shaped head crowned with neatly pomaded hair, his mustache a masterpiece of symmetry and shine. He sat by the window of his room, a cup of tisane steaming gently in his hand as he perused the evening's correspondence. The innkeeper, a portly fellow named Mr. Hargrove, had delivered the post with a deferential bow, his eyes wide with curiosity at the elegant envelope that stood out among the mundane bills and notes. The envelope was a thing of refined beauty, crafted from heavy cream-colored paper that spoke of old money and older traditions. It was sealed with a blob of silver wax, impressed with the crest of a noble house, a stylized swan encircled by thorns. Poirot's green eyes, sharp as a cat's, narrowed slightly as he broke the seal with a precise flick of his letter-opener. Inside, the invitation was penned in flowing script, the ink a deep midnight blue that evoked the Thames at dusk. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," it read, "it would be my utmost pleasure to extend an invitation to you for a moonlit soirée at Darcy Manor this very evening. The gathering promises an evening of refined conversation, exquisite music, and the simple joys of good company under the watchful eye of the harvest moon. Your presence would honor us greatly. Yours sincerely, Lady Felicia Darcy." Poirot leaned back in his chair, the paper held delicately between his fingers. There was something about the note that unsettled him, though he could not immediately pinpoint the source. The handwriting was elegant, yet there was a subtle tremor in the loops of the letters, as if the hand that wielded the pen had been unsteady. The wax seal, too, bore a faint irregularity, a smudge where the impress had been applied with haste. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot murmured to himself, his voice a soft, accented whisper in the quiet room. "Not all invitations come with good intentions. One must always question the motive behind the mask of courtesy." He rose with his characteristic precision, adjusting the lapels of his impeccable suit, a dark wool affair tailored to perfection. Poirot was no stranger to the intricacies of high society. His career had taken him into the drawing-rooms of dukes and the salons of baronesses, where secrets lurked beneath layers of politeness and perfume. Yet this invitation carried an undercurrent of urgency, a hidden plea that tugged at his finely tuned instincts. Why him? A detective of his caliber was not typically summoned for mere social frivolity. No, there was trouble afoot. He sensed it as surely as he could detect the subtle notes of chamomile in his tisane. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Poirot made his way to Darcy Manor. The estate loomed at the edge of the village, a grand Georgian pile of honey-colored stone surrounded by manicured gardens that sloped down to the river. The driveway was lined with lanterns, their flames flickering like watchful eyes, guiding carriages and motor cars toward the illuminated facade. Poirot arrived on foot, preferring the solitude of the walk to gather his thoughts. The night air was cool against his skin, carrying the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustle of leaves underfoot. Upon entering the manor, he was greeted by a butler, whose starched uniform and impassive face bespoke years of service. "Monsieur Poirot, a pleasure," the man intoned, taking Poirot's hat and cane with practiced ease. The entrance hall was a marvel of opulence. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and walls were adorned with portraits of stern ancestors gazing down with judgmental eyes. Lady Felicia Darcy herself emerged from the drawing-room to welcome him, her gown a cascade of midnight silk that shimmered like the river at night. She was a woman of striking beauty, her dark hair piled in an elegant chignon, her eyes a deep sapphire that held a flicker of something unspoken, fear, perhaps, or desperation. "Monsieur Poirot, how delightful that you could join us," she said, her voice a melodious contralto, though Poirot noted the slight quiver in her tone. She extended a gloved hand, and as he bowed over it, he caught the faint scent of jasmine mingled with something sharper, like anxiety sweat. "The moon is particularly enchanting tonight. Do come through to the terrace. The soirée is in full swing." The terrace overlooked the gardens, where the moon's glow bathed everything in ethereal light. Guests mingled in clusters, their laughter soft and restrained, as if the night itself demanded, "Hush." A string quartet played from a gazebo draped in ivy, the strains of a gentle waltz floating on the breeze. Waiters in crisp livery circulated with trays of champagne flutes, the bubbles catching the moonlight like tiny stars. Poirot accepted a glass, sipping it sparingly as his eyes scanned the assembly. There were perhaps 24 guests, a mix of local gentry and visitors from afar. Lord Whitcomb, a tall man with a rakish mustache and a reputation for both charm and financial indiscretions, held court near the balustrade, his laughter booming a touch too loudly for the serene setting. Beside him stood his wife, Lady Whitcomb, her lavender gown a shade too vibrant, her smile fixed in a way that suggested underlying strain. An artist named Monsieur Duval sketched idly on a notepad, his fingers stained with charcoal, while a young maid hovered at the edges, her uniform neat, but her eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. Poirot positioned himself near a stone urn overflowing with night-blooming jasmine, allowing him to observe without drawing undue attention. His little gray cells, as he fondly called them, were already at work, cataloging details with the precision of a watchmaker. Lady Felicia moved among her guests with graceful poise, yet Poirot noticed how her gloved hands trembled ever so slightly as she adjusted a shawl or accepted a compliment. She glanced repeatedly toward the garden's darker recesses, where the moonlight failed to penetrate the thick hedges and ancient yews. The quartet transitioned to a softer melody, something by Debussy that evoked the gentle lapping of waves. Guests paired off for a leisurely stroll along the lantern-lit paths, their voices murmuring like the river below. Poirot engaged in light conversation with a retired colonel, discussing the merits of English gardens versus those of Belgium, but his attention remained divided. There was an undercurrent here, a tension coiled like a spring beneath the surface of civility. Whispers of debts, old rivalries, and unspoken scandals floated just out of earshot, teasing his curiosity. As the evening deepened, the moon climbed higher, its light casting long shadows that danced like phantoms across the lawn. Poirot excused himself from the colonel and wandered toward the edge of the terrace, where Lady Felicia stood alone, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "A beautiful night, madame," he said softly, approaching with his unhurried gait. She started slightly, turning to him with a forced smile. "Indeed, Monsieur Poirot. The moon. It sees everything, does it not? All our little secrets laid bare." Her words hung in the air, laden with meaning. Poirot inclined his head, his eyes meeting hers. "The moon is impartial, madame. It illuminates without judgment, but sometimes it reveals what we would prefer to keep hidden." Before she could respond, the quartet's music swelled to a crescendo, then paused for a brief intermission. The guests applauded politely, the "he" sound echoing faintly. Midnight approached. The grandfather clock in the manor struck the hour with solemn chimes that reverberated through the night. And then, shattering the fragile peace, a scream pierced the air, a raw, primal cry that cut through the murmurs and music like a knife. It came from the garden, near the marble fountain that gleamed like a ghost in the moonlight. Guests froze, glasses halfway to lips, faces paling in the silver glow. Lady Felicia's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with terror. Poirot's mustache twitched ever so slightly. "Ah," he said calmly, though his mind raced ahead. "The evening takes an interesting turn." The scream echoed once more, fainter now, dissolving into the night. Chaos erupted in subdued waves, guests whispering urgently, the butler hurrying forward, Lady Felicia swaying as if she might faint. Poirot set his glass aside with deliberate care, his gaze sharpening. Trouble had arrived, as he had foreseen. The moonlit soiree was no longer a mere gathering. It had become the stage for something far darker. Chapter 2. The Body in the Garden. The scream had shattered the night's fragile veneer of elegance, sending ripples of alarm through the assembled guests like a stone dropped into still water. Hercule Poirot, ever the picture of composure, moved swiftly but without haste toward the source of the cry, his patent leather shoes crunching softly on the gravel path that led into the garden. Behind him, the terrace erupted into a murmur of confusion, gasps from the ladies, stern commands from the gentlemen, and the butler's authoritative voice calling for lanterns and order. Lady Felicia Darcy clung to the balustrade, her face as pale as the moon overhead, her sapphire eyes wide with a terror that seemed to confirm Poirot's earlier suspicions. The garden of Darcy Manor was a labyrinth of manicured hedges and blooming borders, designed in the formal French style that Poirot admired for its symmetry and precision. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting intricate patterns of shadow that danced like elusive suspects across the lawns. The marble fountain, centerpiece of the lower terrace, stood sentinel amid a bed of white lilies, its waters trickling in a perpetual whisper. But tonight, that whisper was drowned by the urgent footsteps of those converging on the scene. It was the gardener, a weathered man named Elias Thorne, who had raised the alarm. He stood trembling beside the fountain, his cap clutched in gnarled hands, his lantern swinging erratically and throwing grotesque shadows. "Over here, sir. God help us. It's Lord Whitcomb," he stammered as Poirot approached, his voice rough from years of outdoor labor. The other guests trailed behind, forming a hesitant semicircle, their finery now seeming absurd in the face of tragedy. Poirot knelt beside the body with the grace of a man accustomed to such grim discoveries. Lord Whitcomb lay sprawled on the dew-kissed grass, his evening suit disheveled, one arm flung outward as if in a final plea. The moonlight gleamed on a dark pool spreading from beneath his head, a pool of blood that reflected the silver orb above like a macabre mirror. The victim's face, once handsome and animated, with that roguish charm that had won him favors and debts across London society, was now frozen in a mask of surprise. His eyes stared blankly at the stars, unseeing. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice a soft thread in the tense silence. He adjusted his pince-nez glasses, the better to examine the details that others might overlook. First, the wound. A sharp blow to the temple, delivered with force but precision, likely from a blunt instrument. No weapon was immediately visible, but the grass around the body showed signs of a brief struggle, trampled lilies and a scuff mark on the fountain's edge. Poirot's keen eyes traced the small, deliberate clues. A missing cufflink from the lord's left sleeve, glinting nowhere in sight. A faint scent of perfume lingering on his collar, not the jasmine of the garden, but something more exotic, like oriental lilies mixed with vanilla. And footprints in the soft earth that began at the path's edge but abruptly ended near the body, as if the assailant had vanished into thin air. "Ridiculous," Poirot whispered to himself. "Footprints do not end. They are merely concealed. The little gray cells, they will uncover the trick." He rose smoothly, dusting his knees with a handkerchief, and turned to the gathering crowd. Lady Whitcomb, the victim's wife, had arrived, supported by the artist Monsieur Duval. She let out a choked sob, her lavender gown now stained with grass from where she had nearly collapsed. The butler, Mr. Graves, organized the chaos with quiet efficiency, directing servants to fetch blankets and summon the local constable. "We must not touch anything further," Poirot advised in his calm, accented tone. "This is now a scene of crime, n'est-ce pas? The police will appreciate our restraint." His words carried an authority that quelled the rising panic, though his mind raced ahead, piecing together the timeline. The scream had come at midnight. Lord Whitcomb had been seen alive not 10 minutes prior, laughing with a group near the gazebo. Who had lured him here, and why? Lady Felicia approached hesitantly, her gloved hands clasped tightly. "Monsieur Poirot, this is dreadful. Poor Lord Whitcomb. He was a dear friend." Her voice faltered, and she leaned closer, whispering so only he could hear, "It was meant for me." The words hung between them like a veil, heavy with implication. Poirot's mustache twitched, but he merely nodded, his expression inscrutable. "We shall discuss this later, madame. For now, composure is our ally." As the constable arrived, a burly man named Inspector Hargreaves, red-faced and out of breath from his bicycle ride, Poirot stepped aside to allow the official proceedings. But he was no passive observer. With the inspector's grudging permission, he began questioning the guests gently, his voice a soothing murmur that masked the razor-sharp inquiries of his mind. They gathered in the Manor's library, a room lined with leather-bound tomes and warmed by a crackling fire, though no one felt its heat amid the chill of shock. First, Elias Thorne, the gardener. Seated awkwardly on a velvet chair that seemed too fine for his soil-stained trousers, he recounted his discovery. "I were making my rounds, checking the lanterns, when I heard a thud, like something heavy fallin'. Thought it were a branch, but then I saw him by the fountain. Blood everywhere, sir. I didn't touch nothin', just hollered." Poirot noted the man's steady gaze, unblinking, and the faint tremor in his hands. Not fear, perhaps, but the aftershock of horror. And before the thud, monsieur, any voices? Footsteps? Thorne shook his head. Nothing but the music from the terrace and the fountain trickling. Next came Lady Whitcomb, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, as if grief had not yet fully settled. My husband. He said he was stepping out for a cigar. He often did that at parties, to clear his head. She twisted a handkerchief in her lap, the lavender scent of her perfume overpowering in the confined space. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And his debts, madame. I have heard whispers that Lord Whitcomb owed considerable sums. Might this have motivated an unfortunate encounter?" She stiffened, her composure cracking. "Debts? Yes, but nothing we couldn't manage. He was charming. People forgave him much." Yet her glance darted away toward the window where the moon still shone mockingly. Monsieur Duval, the artist, fidgeted with his charcoal-stained fingers, his sketch-pad abandoned on a side table. "I saw nothing, Monsieur Poirot. I was sketching the moonlight on the river when the scream came. Lord Whitcomb? A pleasant fellow, but we barely spoke." Poirot's eyes lingered on the pad, where quick lines depicted the garden, but curiously, no figures. "You observe much, as an artist. Perhaps a shadow, a movement?" Duval shrugged. "Only the play of light and dark. Art is my focus, not intrigue." The maid, a young woman named Clara, was last among the initial interviewees. She entered the library pale and trembling, her uniform crisp but her apron twisted in nervous hands. "I was serving drinks on the terrace, sir. Didn't see nothing in the garden." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting interruption. Poirot's tone softened further. "And Lady Felicia? You attend to her closely, no? Any unusual requests this evening?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head too quickly. "No, sir, just the usual." But Poirot noted the lie in her eyes, the flicker of evasion. As the questioning wound down, the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds that chased away the moon's dominion. The guests dispersed to their rooms or carriages, the manor now a hive of subdued activity, with servants whispering in the corners. Inspector Hargreaves grumbled about meddling foreigners, but Poirot paid him no mind, returning instead to the fountain. The body had been covered with a sheet, awaiting the coroner, but the scene remained etched in his memory. He stood by the marble edge, gazing into the fading moonlight that danced on the water's surface. The footprints, ah, yes. They began clearly from the path, deep imprints of a man's shoe, but ended abruptly. Poirot circled the area, his steps measured, until he spotted it. A subtle depression in the grass leading toward the hedge, then nothing. "Clever," he mused. The assailant walked backward in their own prints, or perhaps used something to erase the trail. But why stop here? He knelt again, examining the earth. A faint scrape mark suggested a ladder or prop. But no, wait. The fountain's base had a loose stone and behind it a hidden niche. Inside, tucked away, was the missing cufflink, smeared with blood. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The details, they speak. Lord Whitcomb was not killed here. He was moved. The blood pool is too neat. The footprints, a misdirection. The real hunt, he knew, had only begun. Whispers of blackmail, misplaced intentions, and hidden fears swirled in his mind like the river mist. As the sun rose fully, banishing the shadows, Poirot straightened his tie. The day would bring revelations, but for now, the moon's secrets lingered in the light. Chapter 3. Secrets at Breakfast. The first rays of dawn crept over the Thames like a gentle thief, stealing away the remnants of the night shadows and bathing Darcy Manor in a soft, golden haze. The estate, which had pulsed with the drama of moonlight and murder mere hours before, now settled into a deceptive calm. Birds twittered in the ancient oaks, their songs a fragile melody against the undercurrent of unease that lingered in the air. Hercule Poirot, having retired to his guest room for a brief respite, emerged refreshed, his suit impeccably pressed, his mustache waxed to perfection, his mind as sharp as the morning light. Sleep had eluded him, of course. The little gray cells demanded activity, piecing together the puzzle of Lord Whitcomb's untimely demise. The breakfast room was a sunlit haven at the rear of the manor, its French doors opening onto the terrace where the soirée had begun so innocently the evening prior. A long oak table groaned under the weight of silver chafing dishes, poached eggs nestled in delicate china, rashers of bacon crisped to perfection, toast points arranged in neat fans, and pots of steaming tea and coffee exuding aromas that should have been comforting. Yet the atmosphere was thick with concealed panic, like a storm cloud veiled by polite smiles. The guests, those who had remained overnight at Lady Felicia's insistence, and the inspector's subtle directive, filtered in one by one, their faces etched with the weariness of a sleepless night. Poirot took his seat at the end of the table, a vantage point that allowed him to observe without intrusion. He poured himself a cup of café au lait, strong, black coffee tempered with hot milk, and added precisely 2 lumps of sugar, stirring with a silver spoon that chimed softly against the porcelain. His green eyes, alert and unblinking, catalogued each arrival with the precision of a naturalist studying rare specimens. First came Lady Whitcomb, the widow, her lavender gown from the night before, exchanged for a morning ensemble of deep violet silk that clung a touch too closely to her figure. The color was overpowering in the morning light, a shade too vibrant for grief, as if she had donned it in haste or distraction. She moved with a studied grace, but Poirot noted the subtle tremors. Her hand shook as she lifted the teapot, spilling a drop onto the saucer. "Good morning, all," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread. She selected a single slice of toast, buttering it absent-mindedly, her eyes darting to the empty chair where her husband might have sat. The scent of lavender perfume wafted strongly from her, more than etiquette demanded, perhaps to mask something else, Poirot mused. Sweat? Fear? Or the residue of a nocturnal encounter? Beside her settled Monsieur Duval, the artist, his charcoal-stained fingers now scrubbed clean but still fidgeting with a napkin. He had brought his sketch-pad to the table, an unusual breach of decorum, and Poirot watched as he idly doodled on its edges, abstract swirls that betrayed nervous energy. Duval opted for a hearty plate, eggs, sausages, and tomatoes, devouring them with mechanical efficiency, as if food were a distraction from darker thoughts. His glances flicked toward the French doors, where the garden lay visible, the fountain now cordoned off by the constable's tape. "A tragic night," he said to no one in particular, his French accent thickening with emotion. "One cannot capture such horror on paper." The maid, Clara, hovered at the periphery, refilling cups and clearing plates with downcast eyes. She was a slip of a girl, no more than 20, with mousy hair pinned neatly under her cap and a uniform that hung loosely on her frame. Poirot observed her closely. Each time she approached the sideboard, her gaze strayed toward the west wing of the manor, where the study door remained firmly locked, its key presumably in Lady Felicia's possession. What secrets lay behind that door? Financial ledgers, love letters, or evidence of blackmail, as whispers suggested. Clara's hands trembled as she poured tea for the colonel, who had joined the table with a bluff "morning" and a plate piled high with kedgeree. Lady Felicia herself entered last, a vision of composed elegance in a dove-gray morning dress, her dark hair swept back simply. Yet Poirot detected the strain, faint shadows under her eyes, a pallor that powder could not fully conceal. She took her place at the head of the table, murmuring apologies for the subdued fare. "Under the circumstances, we must make do," she said softly, her voice carrying that melodious quiver from the night before. She sipped black tea, eschewing food, her gloved hands, why gloves at breakfast, folded neatly in her lap. Conversation flowed into polite rivulets, skirting the abyss of the murder like a river avoiding a chasm. The colonel expounded on the weather, predicting rain by noon. Duval complimented the manor's architecture. Lady Whitcomb spoke vaguely of returning to London. But beneath the words lay silences pregnant with meaning. Poirot listened, his spoon clinking rhythmically as he stirred his coffee anew, though it needed no further agitation. He observed the plates. Lady Felicia's untouched, a sign of inner turmoil. Duval's scraped clean, perhaps to occupy his hands. Clara, when she paused to nibble a crust in the servants' alcove, ate nothing substantial, her eyes again flicking westward. It was in the simplest of ways that a clue revealed itself, as clues often do in the quiet moments. Lady Whitcomb reached for her teacup, but in her distraction she placed it not on its matching saucer but on one belonging to the coffee service. A mismatched pairing that clinked awkwardly. Poirot's eyes narrowed. As she lifted it again, a faint residue clung to the cup's rim, a powdery film almost imperceptible that caught the light like dust motes in sunbeam. He leaned forward subtly, inhaling discreetly, the acrid hint of a sleeping draught, perhaps chloral hydrate or something similar, masked by the tea's bergamot. "Ah," Poirot said quietly to himself, a small smile playing beneath his mustache. "When one is anxious, one forgets the smallest details, and yet it is the smallest details that scream the truth." He set his own cup down with precision, his mind whirring. The draught, intended for whom? Lady Felicia had whispered of misplaced intent. Lord Whitcomb's death bore the marks of accident or misdirection. And the teacup's mismatch suggested haste, a swap in the dim light of pre-dawn preparations. Emboldened by his observation, Poirot steered the conversation gently toward revelation. "Madame Whitcomb," he began, his voice a soothing murmur, "your lavender is most becoming this morning. It reminds one of the gardens in Provence, no? Though perhaps a touch strong for breakfast, might it be to ward off the night's chill?" She flushed, her hand touching her collar. I suppose I overdid the perfume. Nerves, you understand." Her eyes met his briefly, then skittered away. Turning to Duval, Poirot nodded at the sketchpad. "Monsieur, your art captures the essence of things. Did you perhaps sketch anything of note last night? A figure in the shadows, peut-être?" The artist paused mid-bite, his pencil stilling. "Nothing specific, Monsieur Poirot, just impressions." But his doodles, Poirot noted from afar, included a crude outline of the fountain, with a shadowy form. Beside it, Clara, clearing the table, dropped a spoon with a clatter, her face paling. "Pardon, sir," she whispered, bending to retrieve it. As she did, Poirot caught her glance once more toward the west wing. "Mademoiselle," he said kindly, "the study, it intrigues you, yes? Perhaps you have delivered trays there recently?" She straightened abruptly. "No, sir, it's locked. Lady Felicia's orders. But her voice cracked, and she hurried from the room. Lady Felicia watched the exchange, her teacup steady in her hand. "Monsieur Poirot, your observations are as keen as ever. But surely breakfast is not the time for interrogations." Her tone was light, but her eyes pleaded for respite. "Interrogations? No, madame, merely conversation. The truth, it emerges in the light of day, like the sun chasing the moon." Poirot rose, excusing himself with a bow. The meal concluded in subdued fashion, guests dispersing to pack or confer with the inspector, who had returned with his notebook and a team of constables. Poirot wandered into the garden once more, the morning light spilling across the lawns in warm cascades. The fountain, now bathed in daylight, seemed less ominous, its waters sparkling innocently. He stood where the body had lain, retracing the footprints in his mind. The sleeping draught tied into the narrative, perhaps meant to sedate Lady Felicia, but administered to Lord Whitcomb by mistake. Blackmail, a locked study, nervous glances. The pieces fit, but not yet perfectly. As bees hummed among the lilies, Poirot's thoughts turned to the west wing. What hid behind that door? He would investigate, subtly, for the mystery deepened with the rising sun. The moon had watched the deed. Now the day would reveal the doer. Chapter 4. The Midnight Confession. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, surrendering the sky once more to the dominion of the moon. Darcy Manor, which had buzzed with the subdued activity of investigation throughout the day, now fell into a hush that bordered on oppressive. The constables had departed after a thorough search of the grounds, their notebooks filled with statements and sketches, leaving behind an air of unresolved tension. Inspector Hargreaves had grumbled about loose ends and promised to return at first light, but for now the estate belonged to its inhabitants, and to Hercule Poirot, who had spent the afternoon in quiet contemplation, his little gray cells weaving the threads of evidence into a coherent tapestry. As evening deepened, Poirot requested that the key suspects gather in the grand drawing-room. The message was delivered discreetly by the butler, Mr. Graves, whose impassive face betrayed no hint of the drama to come. "Monsieur Poirot wishes to address you all at 8 o'clock, he intoned to each in turn, his voice a low rumble that echoed through the corridors. The house was dimly lit, as if in mourning. Candles flickered in silver sconces along the walls, casting long shadows that stretched across the marble floors like accusing fingers. The chandeliers overhead were unlit, their crystals hanging dormant, reflecting only the faint glow from the hearth, where a low fire crackled sporadically. The drawing-room itself was a cavern of faded grandeur. Heavy velvet drapes framed tall windows overlooking the garden, where the marble fountain stood silent under the moon's watchful gaze. Antique furniture, settees upholstered in damask, wingback chairs with carved mahogany arms, arranged in a semicircle around a central rug woven with intricate floral patterns. Poirot had positioned himself in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, his small frame dwarfed by its proportions. Yet his presence commanded the space. He sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his mustache a symmetrical sentinel above his calm expression. One by one they entered. Lady Felicia Darcy arrived first, her dove-gray dress from breakfast replaced by a simple black gown that whispered against the floor as she moved. She took a seat near the window, her hands clasped tightly, her sapphire eyes reflecting the candlelight like distant stars. Next came Lady Whitcomb, still in her violet morning attire, her lavender scent now subdued, as if the day's wait had dimmed its potency. She perched on the edge of a settee, her posture rigid, avoiding eye contact with the others. Monsieur Duval, the artist, slouched into a chair opposite, his sketch pad absent for once, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the armrest. The colonel, ever the military man, stood briefly at attention before sitting, his mustache bristling with unspoken questions. And finally, Clara the maid, summoned from her quarters, entered hesitantly, her uniform crisp, but her face ashen. She hovered at the periphery until Poirot gestured gently for her to sit. The clock on the mantel struck 8, its chimes resonating through the room like a summons to judgment. Poirot cleared his throat softly, his voice emerging in that accented cadence and that was both soothing and inexorable. Mes amis, thank you for gathering. The events of last night have cast a shadow over this beautiful manor, but shadows, they flee before the light of truth. I, Hercule Poirot, have employed the order and method to unravel this mystery. Allow me to recount the timeline calmly, step by step, until no lie can hide in the gentle rhythm of my words. He began with the invitation, his words painting the scene of the moonlit soiree with vivid yet restrained strokes. The champagne, the quartet's melody, the guests mingling under the silver glow, all seemed idyllic until the scream shattered the peace. Poirot described the discovery of Lord Whitcomb's body by the fountain, the blow to the temple, the pool of blood mirroring the moon. He noted the missing cufflink, found later in the fountain's niche, smeared with blood, a detail that suggested the body had been moved, the scene staged to mislead. The footprints, he continued, his tone even, they began but did not end. A clever ruse, perhaps walking backward or erasing steps with care. But why? To conceal the true location of the crime? Non, mes amis. The wound was not from a weapon wielded in anger, but from a fall, against the fountain's edge, perhaps induced by something subtler. He turned his gaze to the breakfast that morning, recounting the polite conversations laced with panic. The mismatched teacup, the residue of a sleeping draught. Chloral hydrate, the inspector confirms from the coroner's preliminary report. A sedative, meant to calm nerves, but in excess it can disorient, cause stumbling, even fatality if combined with alcohol, as Lord Whitcomb had consumed champagne liberally. The room grew still, the only sounds the faint pop of embers in the fire and the distant hoot of an owl outside. Lady Felicia shifted slightly, her gloved hands tightening in her lap. Poirot's eyes met hers, holding them steadily. Madame Darcy, you whispered to me last night. It was meant for me. A confession of sorts, no? But not to murder, to a secret that bound you to the victim. A sudden crack appeared in her composure. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, the candlelight catching them like dew on petals. She drew a shuddering breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, Lord Whitcomb. He had been blackmailing me for years. An indiscretion from my youth, a letter, foolishly written, that could ruin my reputation, my marriage, everything. He demanded payments, favors. Last night, I thought to confront him, but fear held me back. The others stirred. Lady Whitcomb's hand flew to her mouth. Duval leaned forward. The colonel harumphed. Clara, pale as a ghost, stared at the floor. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And so the draft. It was for you, to steady your nerves before the confrontation. But fate, she is capricious. The cups were mixed. Lady Felicia nodded, tears now tracing silent paths down her cheeks. I prepared it myself, in the study. But I set it aside when a guest called. When I returned, it was gone. Her voice broke, but she composed herself. I did not kill him, monsieur. "I swear it." Poirot inclined his head. "I know, madame. You did not." His gaze shifted slowly, settling on Clara. The maid trembled, her hands twisting in her apron, her eyes wide with dawning realization. The room seemed to hold its breath as Poirot addressed her softly, his voice a gentle murmur that carried the weight of inevitability. "You did not mean to kill, only to silence. The moon bore witness." Clara gasped, a small choked sound that echoed in the silence. She shook her head vehemently, but her body betrayed her. Shoulders slumping, tears welling. "No, oh, God!" She fell to her knees on the rug, sobbing, her uniform pooling around her like a shroud. The others watched in stunned silence as the confession poured forth, halting at first, then in a torrent. "It was me, sir. But not murder, I swear. Lady Felicia, she's been so kind to me, like a mother. I overheard Lord Whitcomb threatening her in the study yesterday afternoon, demanding more money, laughing at her tears. I couldn't bear it. When I saw the cup with the draft, I thought, if I gave it to him, he'd sleep through the night, miss his chance to torment her further. Silence him, just for a bit." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, her voice quavering. "I switched the cups when no one was looking. Lady Felicia's tea for his champagne glass. No, wait. I poured it into his drink when he set it down near the terrace. He didn't notice. He was laughing with the others. But I didn't know. The dose mixed with the alcohol. He wandered to the garden, dizzy, and fell against the fountain. I heard the thud, saw him lying there. I panicked, moved the body a bit, hid the cufflink that came off in the struggle with the grass, tried to make it look like an attack." Poirot listened without interruption, his expression one of quiet understanding. "And the footprints? You erased them carefully, walking backward to the path." Clara nodded miserably. "Yes, sir. I didn't want it traced back, but the moon, it saw everything. I couldn't sleep knowing." Lady Felicia rose, crossing to the kneeling girl and placing a hand on her shoulder. "Clara, why didn't you tell me?" The maid looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I wanted to protect you, milady, like you've protected me." The colonel cleared his throat gruffly. "Good heavens, an accident, then?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, but with intent to harm, however misguided. The law will decide, but the truth, it is out." Duval exhaled sharply. Lady Whitcomb sagged in relief. Her husband's blackmailer exposed, his death unintentional. As the sobs subsided, Poirot rose, signaling to Mr. Graves to summon the inspector. The room, once heavy with secrets, now felt lighter, the shadows retreating as candles burned brighter. Clara was helped to her feet, still trembling, but the weight of deception lifted. Lady Felicia wiped her eyes, a fragile peace settling over her features. The confession had unfolded not in roars of accusation, but in whispers of revelation, beneath the same moon that had illuminated the tragedy. Poirot stepped to the window, gazing out at the silver-lit garden. Justice, he reflected, often came softly, like the night breeze stirring the leaves. Chapter 5. Peace Beneath the Moon. The drawing room of Darcy Manor, once a stage for revelations and tears, now emptied slowly as the weight of the confession settled like dew on the grass outside. Clara, the young maid whose misguided loyalty had unraveled into tragedy, was led away gently by Inspector Hargreaves, who had arrived promptly after the butler's summons. Her sobs had faded into quiet acceptance, her pale face illuminated by the candlelight as she glanced back at Lady Felicia with a mixture of remorse and gratitude. "Whodunit, sire." Inspector, his earlier gruffness softened by the unexpected turn of events, assured the group that the matter would be handled with discretion. manslaughter, perhaps, rather than murder, given the accidental nature of the dose's fatal interaction with Lord Whitcomb's inebriated state. Hercule Poirot remained by the fireplace for a moment longer, his small hands clasped behind his back, his eyes reflecting the dying embers. The guests dispersed with murmurs of relief and lingering shock. Lady Whitcomb to her chambers, her steps lighter now that the shadow of her husband's debts and secrets had lifted. Monsieur Duval to the terrace, perhaps to sketch the moon one final time. The Colonel to his pipe and a stiff brandy in the library. Lady Felicia approached Poirot, her black gown whispering against the floor, her eyes still bright with unshed emotion. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, her voice a fragile melody in the quiet room, "how can I ever thank you? You have restored peace to this house, though at such a cost." She extended her hand, ungloved now, revealing the faint tremble that had betrayed her anxiety from the start. Poirot bowed over it with his customary elegance, his mustache brushing lightly against her skin. "Madame, it is the order and method that prevail, always. The little gray cells, they do not rest until the truth emerges. Your secret is safe. The blackmailer's hold is broken. And Clara, she acted from the heart, non. The law may be merciful." Lady Felicia nodded, a small smile breaking through her sorrow. "She has been with me since she was a girl. I will speak for her, provide what aid I can." She paused, glancing toward the window where the moon hung full and serene, its light spilling across the garden like a benediction. The moon. It has seen so much this night. Beauty and horror, intertwined. "Indeed, madame," Poirot replied, his tone gentle. "But now it watches over peace. Go, rest. The dawn will bring a new day." As she departed, the manor seemed to exhale, its ancient walls absorbing the resolution like a sponge taking in water. Poirot extinguished the candles one by one, the wicks hissing softly in the wax, plunging the room into shadow. He retrieved his hat and cane from the hall, nodding to Mr. Graves, who stood sentinel by the door. "A fine establishment, monsieur. Your discretion is commendable." The butler inclined his head. "Thank you, sir. Safe travels under the moon." Poirot stepped out into the night, the cool air enveloping him like a familiar cloak. The gravel path crunched under his precise footsteps as he made his way not toward the village inn, but down the sloping lawn toward the riverbank. The Thames flowed steadily here, its waters dark and murmuring, reflecting the moon's silver disk in shimmering fragments that danced like elusive clues on the surface. The same quiet moon that had begun the tale now presided over its end, impartial and eternal, casting its glow over the estate and the village beyond. He paused at the water's edge, his reflection joining the moon's in the gentle ripples, a small, dapper figure against the vastness of the night sky. The air carried the faint scent of river mist and lingering roses from the garden, a soothing balm after the turmoil. Poirot leaned on his cane, his mind replaying the events with the satisfaction of a puzzle completed. "Ah, mon ami," he murmured to the moon, as if addressing an old confidant. "You have been the silent witness to it all, the invitation under your light, the scream that pierced your serenity, the secrets whispered in your shadows. Justice," he reflected, "need not always roar like a lion in the arena. Sometimes it whispers, softly, gently, beneath the moon. In this case, it had come not through dramatic confrontations or clever traps, but through the quiet unraveling of human frailties, loyalty misplaced, fear unchecked, debts that bound souls tighter than chains. Lord Whitcomb, charming yet venal, had met his end not by malice aforethought, but by a cascade of errors, a draught intended for calm, a stumble in the dark, a fall against unyielding marble. Clara's act, born of devotion, had twisted fate's hand, but Poirot saw no villains here, only the tragic interplay of good intentions gone awry. He thought of Lady Felicia, her composure a mask for years of silent suffering under blackmail's yoke. The locked study, with its hidden letters and ledgers, would now yield to light. The West Wing's secrets aired, the manor could breathe freely. And Clara, poor, impulsive Clara, her confession had been a catharsis, her knees on the rug a symbol of surrender to truth. The inspector would investigate further, but Poirot's work was done, the threads tied, the symmetry restored. A soft breeze stirred the leaves along the bank, carrying the distant toll of a church bell. Midnight had passed, the witching hour giving way to tranquility. Poirot straightened, his steps measured and calm as he turned from the river. The moon followed him like a benevolent guardian, illuminating the path back through the garden. He passed the fountain, now silent and innocent in the night, its waters trickling, as if washing away the blood-stain of memory. The hedges, once conspirators in shadow, now stood sentinel in peace. As he reached the driveway, a carriage awaited, arranged by Lady Felicia, no doubt, to convey him to the inn or beyond. But Poirot paused, gazing back at the manor. Its windows glowed faintly with lamplight, figures moving like ghosts within, servants tidying, guests preparing for departure. The string quartet's gazebo stood empty, the lanterns extinguished, but in his mind the gentle waltz played on, a reminder of the evening's fragile beauty before chaos intruded. "Adieu, Darcy Manor," he whispered, tipping his hat to the moon. "May your nights be calm henceforth." The carriage ride to the village was uneventful, the horses' hooves clipping softly on the cobblestones. The driver, a taciturn fellow who asked no questions. Poirot leaned back against the cushions, his eyes half closed, allowing the rhythm to lull him. Yet his thoughts drifted not to rest, but to the broader tapestry of human nature. How often, he pondered, did the quest for protection lead to peril? Clara's devotion mirrored countless tales he had encountered. The faithful servant, the protective friend, the desperate lover, all weaving webs that ensnared the innocent. By the time he arrived at the inn, the moon had climbed higher, its light filtering through the curtains of his room. Mr. Hargrove, the innkeeper, had left a pot of tisane warming by the fire, a thoughtful gesture that Poirot appreciated. He sipped it slowly, the chamomile soothing his senses, as he penned a brief note to his old friend Hastings. Though Hastings was far away, the habit of sharing triumphs persisted. "The case of the moonlit murder," he wrote in his neat script, "resolved not with thunder, but with a whisper. The heart it deceives, but the details, they never lie." Setting the pen aside, Poirot prepared for bed, his movements precise, suit hung carefully, shoes polished for the morrow, mustache given a final twirl. As he lay down, the moon's glow cast a silver square on the floor, a final companion in the quiet hours. Sleep came gently, his dreams untroubled by shadows, filled instead with the orderly gardens of his Belgian homeland. Morning brought a crisp autumn dawn, the sun chasing the moon from the sky. Poirot rose early, breakfasting on fresh bread and fruit before departing for London. The village of Eldridge stirred to life around him. Farmers heading to fields, children scampering to school, the Thames sparkling under the new light. News of the manor's events would spread, of course, but softened by distance and discretion, becoming a tale whispered over tea rather than shouted in headlines. As his train pulled away from the station, Poirot gazed out at the receding landscape, the manor a distant silhouette against the hills. Peace had returned, fragile yet enduring, like the river's flow. And in his heart a light satisfaction bloomed, the knowledge that order had been restored, one whisper at a time. Back at the manor, Lady Felicia stood by the riverbank where Poirot had reflected, her shawl drawn against the chill. The moon had set, but its memory lingered in the mist. She thought of Clara, of forgiveness, of new beginnings. The estate would heal, its gardens bloom anew come spring. And as the day unfolded, the story of murder beneath the moon faded into legend, a softly spoken mystery where death and deceit gave way to deduction and, ultimately, serenity. For you, dear listener, as the tale concludes, let the images linger. The moon's silver path on the water, Poirot's calm silhouette, the whisper of justice in the night. Drift toward sleep now, your thoughts fading like ripples on the Thames, peaceful, complete, and still. The world turns, mysteries resolve, and beneath the moon all finds its quiet end. Soft music fades in, a gentle lullaby on strings, evoking the river's flow. Thank you for joining Peacetime Story. If this mystery brought you calm or comfort, don't forget to subscribe for more softly spoken tales of secrets, sleep, and serenity.